Hi, everyone. This is John Girardi with Right to Life of Central California, bringing you another in our 40 videos for 40 Days for Life series. 40 Days for Life is the international campaign of prayer and presence outside abortion clinics throughout the country and throughout the world. If you want to learn more about our 40 Days campaign here in Fresno, please visit us at rtlcc.org or give us a call at 559-229-2229. Today, I want to talk about kind of an old chestnut that we in the pro-life movement have heard quite a bit of, being personally pro-life, but fill in the blank after the word but. I'm personally pro-life, but, and the but usually seems to be followed by some way of saying that an individual is okay with abortion being legal. I'm okay with abortion, but I think other people should have the right to. I'm not okay with abortion. Personally, I wouldn't have an abortion, but I'm okay with other people getting an abortion. And I think this is kind of fundamentally for Christians an almost impossible position to hold. It's usually justified with some way of trying to argue that basically it's some kind of appeal to some sense that not everything immoral has to be prosecuted criminally by the state, that not every immoral thing has to be dealt with by the state with basically restrictions and criminal penalties. Now, it is true that the law is a very flexible instrument, and it can be deployed in a whole bunch of different ways, in a whole bunch of different scenarios, to express a whole range of attitudes that a government may take towards a given practice. You can have criminal prohibition on the one hand. You can have legalization and government funding on the opposite extreme, and there's a whole spectrum of attitudes in between. Now, the problem is with many of these sort of liberal Christian arguments that, just because I think abortion is immoral does not mean that it should be illegal to everyone, is the fundamental nature of abortion itself, which is that it's depriving from a whole class of human beings a very basic and essential thing that we would think of as an ordinary duty under law, an ordinary duty to protect every member of the human family from acts of private violence. This is kind of a very basic precondition of living in a civilized society, that if not everyone is protected under law from private violence, then effectively they have no status under law. If I come up to you and I punch you, if I'm going to punch you in the face, there's a whole suite of legal principles that can stop me before my fist connects to your face. There's my knowledge that you can engage in justified self-defense. You can punch me back to stop me from punching you. If there's a cop in the room when I'm trying to punch you, he can tackle me to the ground, or other people can come to your aid to wrestle me down to the ground. If I do connect, I know before I even throw that punch that there's this whole suite of consequences, legal consequences, that can accrue to me. There's civil liability. If I punch you in the face and you sue me for the tort of battery, unconsented touching, I will probably be liable. I might have to pay you punitive damages. I might have to pay you compensatory damages. If you have medical bills or stuff, I'm going to have to pay for them. And there are also criminal penalties, possibly. If I punch you in the face, I could go to jail. I could be tried before a jury of my peers. I can be convicted of assault and battery. So there's a whole suite of rights that exist to prevent me from punching you in the face. And some of them provide you with civil liability protection, that you can sue me if I do this bad thing, get money from me if I do this bad thing. And some of it is criminal prohibitions, that I can go to jail if I do this bad thing. If you take away all of those protections from a whole class of human beings, you are essentially reducing them to the level of subhumans. If you said no women deserve any of those protections, well, then they're not really free and equal members of society anymore. They have been reduced to a lesser than, apartheid, subclass of society. We had a situation like that in the United States in various ways in our treatment of African Americans over the course of this country's history, and in some cases of Native Americans too. Particularly with African Americans under slavery, this was a signature lack of rights that African Americans had, this lack of protection from private violence, that in that a slave owner could beat his slave, rape his slave, kill his slave, and face no civil liability for it and no criminal liability for it. So when you're talking about these fundamental questions of human dignity, it's not necessarily a thing where the government can kind of be in a position to pick and choose whether or not it's going to have criminal prohibitions on it. If you decline to enforce criminal prohibitions on it, to enforce a whole suite of protections for human life against acts of private violence, you've reduced a whole class of human beings to being subhumans. And that's precisely what we argue in the case of the unborn, that for no rational reason, we have taken this particular class of human beings, argued because they are totally dependent. Well, why should that matter? There are all kinds of walking around outside the womb people who are completely dependent that we're not allowed just to off if we find them inconvenient. Well, they're smaller and less developed. That's also not a reason. There are lots of smaller and less developed people who are very inconvenient. They're called 2-year-olds. We're not allowed to kill them. Basically, to deny unborn children those protections under law is to horrifically reduce them to the level of subhumans in a way that makes no rational sense. So, for various kinds of Christians to argue, well, just because something's immoral doesn't mean the state should outlaw it. Okay, maybe that would make sense for something like premarital sex or something, where in order to enforce that, you might need a really elaborate apparatus of almost like a police state in order to enforce it. Maybe the intrusion, the governmental intrusion into people's lives would be worse than the crime itself, and maybe the attitude of the state should not be one of criminal prohibition, but something less. All right, maybe. But we're talking here about these fundamental questions of who is a human and who is not, and who has actual equal status under law and who does not. If you take that away from an unborn child, as a Christian, as someone who thinks that abortion is wrong, and that's all these arguments for, I think abortion is bad, but there's no way you can think that you are personally pro-life, that you think abortion is the taking of an innocent human life, but that the state shouldn't have a role. It's an untenable position. For Right to Life of Central California, I'm John Girardi.